So in the first two series, we looked at, one was an in-depth tshuva from the Masei Binyamin, the student of the Ramah, about giving an aliyah to a blind man, where he really expressed the empathy and the deep understanding part, a lot having to do with the fact that it was relevant to him personally about what exclusion can mean and how exclusion can push people away, and the responsibility of halacha and the rabbi to find, whatever means possible to have everybody as equal members of the community. And then the second session, we looked at um, a series of sources around the mitzvot relating to the ger, who is somebody who is, as the Chazal understand the person to be, is the convert, somebody who is one of us, but who is likely to be marginalized or not seen as equal, and the particular mitzvot that and mandates that relate, loving the ger, not oppressing the ger, and we particularly looked at how the way some of those mitzvot are understood, they really speak to not just like, oh, you really have to love the ger, you have to love every Jew and also really the ger. Like, it's not just a doubling, but it's an awareness, but it's a particularly identifying of a unique relationship. And what I really underscored was to understand the mitzvah as one of empathy. Higerim hayitem beretz Mitzrayim, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You experienced this marginalization. You know what that is. You have to try to put yourself in the ger's position. So that's the ahavat ger, so that you will really understand how critical it is, equal treatment and equal membership. And we sort of, and we explored that. And then we also, at the end of it, looked at, what do you call it, at the way that's one Rishon, one of the Gaonim, actually, Sadia Gaon does not have a mitzvah of loving the ger or not oppressing the ger, but actually says the mitzvah is just, a ger is like every other Jew. That's basically fundamentally a mitzvah of equality. And we pointed out, the challenge about somehow, in terms of, in general, about, that sometimes you need labels to identify a distinct group in order to ensure that they get proper accommodations and treatments and responsiveness and are not ignored and so on. But then also, the flip side of it is that then they continue to be, to some degree, the other. And how do we balance that with the challenge of really just, complete, everybody is equal. And, I showed the cartoon or the picture about, right, the difference between like reality, equality and equity, and how do you, and how do you sort of accommodate everybody's needs, and somebody, but fundamentally structure society in which it's not, in which people are all seen as equal. And I'm remembering that once when the yeshiva did a program about it, we had a speaker. She has now passed away. Her name is, I'm forgetting her name. She was a YU professor, and she had an expert in medical ethics. She herself was blind, and she was speaking about disabilities. And she said, I spoke in the first session about how Dvora, my wife, doesn't like the word inclusion, because inclusion suggests that there are people on the outside that, fundamentally they start on the outside and now we're going to include them, rather than fundamentally everybody is an equal member. Well, what this person said was, Adrienne Ash was her name, Dr. Adrienne Ash. She said she rejects the term special needs. She says everybody has the same needs. Everybody has a need of access, dignity, education, membership. Everybody's needs are the same. Some people require, certain accommodations in order that those needs can be met, right? So if somebody, if you're going to create a ramp, it's not because this person has a need that other people don't have. We all have the need of being able to have access to the institution, to the synagogue, to a tzibur, to a community. But in order that that person's, can be met, sometimes there has to be certain accommodations. I thought that was very powerful, and again, speaking to this tension of the othering in order to address the type of accommodations that we need and actions that we need, and at the same time, understanding that fundamentally it's really about us all being equal members. So that was a quick 3-minute review of what we've done these last 2 weeks. And what I want to do today is to look at certain halachic approaches that I think, or what I sort of see as possibly the next frontier in halachic development around here, that sort of that can be huge, not just in terms of, well, let me take a step back. So normally, the way things will go, if there's a reason within halacha that maybe disabilities creates sort of might exclude somebody, is you'll have like 2 responses. So let's say there's the question of, can somebody, a Kohen who is in a wheelchair, do Birchat Kohanim? I think I spoke about this before, that, the simple halacha is you have to be standing in order to do Birchas Kohanim. So can a Kohen in a wheelchair do Birchas Kohanim? So there are 3 answers to this, potential answers. There's what I would consider the wrong answer, and the wrong answer is no, he can't do Birchas Kohanim, right? Which is like, and as I said, this gets back to this tshuva that we read from the Masis Binyamin. Somebody could say, okay, what's the big deal? You don't do Birchas Kohanim. I'm not a Kohen. I never do Birchas Kohanim. And it's like, you don't understand. Here's somebody that, in so many ways, mobility is such a profound issue of feeling empowered, and feeling that, you have power and control in your environment, in the world. This person, does not have those abilities that they used to have before. There's so many ways larger society is telling them they're not the same person that they were. There's so many things, that they can't do. And now finally, you come to shul and you're able to be in a position to have to be given status and dignity and be in a place that you can give a bracha to the people and be a Kohen, as a Kohen. And then you're being told for no reason other than that, like, oh, well, you have to stand or whatever, but but sorry, you can't do that here either, so the show becomes yet another place in which it almost seems like unnecessarily, you're being pushed aside when it actually could have been an opportunity to have, given you a really important type of a status and a role. So, look, I'm not saying that halacha can always find the right answer, but we have to do the best we can in order to see if we can get there. So, and in this case, I believe we can get there. So one answer is, which is I think the wrong answer, because I think another answer is available, is sorry, you can't do it. The next answer is the right answer, but for the wrong reason. And the next answer is, okay, you can do it. Why can you do it? Well, it's true that really you're supposed to be standing, but there are some opinions that would say that b'diavad, it's okay even if you weren't standing, and it's a shas hadachaks, and we can be lenient, so b'diavad, we can allow it. Okay, now, at least it's saying, yes, you can do it, and that's a lot better than, no, you can't do it. But it's still, and you don't always have to pay attention to what the logic of the explanation is. I got my ruling, I can do it, fine. But at some level, it's not ideal, because what it really says is, it is true that you are a little bit lesser, but we are going to accommodate because we're trying to, have some sympathy for you. But yes, it is true, it's really not ideal and you are a little lesser. And that tends to be most of the time when you're able to find an answer for a case of disabilities. It's like, okay, we can make a way to make this work. Even though it's not really the ideal. And that's not great. And it's not great for 2 reasons. Number one is, again, if somebody is paying attention, I'll get to the hand in a minute. If somebody is paying attention to the logic behind it, then they're getting the message that, okay, they're really not doing what they need to do. As I said, sometimes just in practice, since you're able to do it, who cares what the underlying reason is? But the other reason is because, ideally, you want halacha to, I could say this, both to fully see the reality that you're in and to fully understand it, and number 2, to be a force for good. So and let me sort of say what the contrast is. The alternative answer would be not to say, okay, you're not standing, but we can figure out how b'diavad that can be okay. The alternative answer would be to say, look, standing for a person that is not confined to a wheelchair, we know what that looks like. You know, we know what sitting looks like and we know what standing looks like. But for somebody that is in a wheelchair, maybe we should be asking the question of not what does standing look like for people that are not in a wheelchair. We should ask the question of what does standing look like for somebody that is in a wheelchair. And, you know, maybe for that person, standing should be defined as differently. Like maybe we should ask the question, well, if standing is a way of showing respect or whatever, you know, if the president were to walk to the room, right, or a big Rosh Hashiva, you know, what would somebody in a wheelchair do? Like everybody is standing. What would this person do? You know, maybe they would like sit up straight. Maybe they would like lean forward. You know, maybe, I don't know, they would lift their tush off the wheelchair or something. And maybe we should say that, you know, that is what defines standing for this person. And that is the question. Can halacha not say, we're going to define all of these things in terms of able-bodied people without disabilities, etc. You're going to fall short, but we'll find a way to say that b'diavad it's okay, which still basically says that the basic, you know, norm of the world and what really counts is all defined by the able-bodied people, but, you know, and you're still falling short. Can we actually find a way where halacha might be able to say, maybe we define it differently for different people, what some of these things mean? And if we can do that, then not only will we not make you in a type of a b'diavad reality, but maybe it could actually be a very powerful corrective, because so much of society is like halacha. It fundamentally defines things through the lens of able-bodied people without, you know, disabilities. And it's, you know, and does not look at the totality of human experience. And people that diverge from that, you know, norm, I'll call it norm, you know, are seen as somewhat other. That is the reality of normal society. And that is the reality of halacha. And maybe rather than reinforcing that reality, maybe if halacha has a way of saying, wait a minute, you know, for different people, these things are defined differently, maybe could actually help to create a much more, you know, multi-chromatic, diverse perspective on what the nature of reality is, rather than a norm and those that deviate from the norm. So that's really what I want to look at is, can halacha find a way not just sometimes to accommodate, but to actually say, maybe we should look at things from the perspective of this person. I'll say one more sentence and then I know there's a hand up, which is, so for example, you know, there's an area in halacha where it talks about like left hand and right hand, you know, that like that like you have to put tefillin on your left hand, because we learn from a pasuk it goes on your weak hand and it's your left hand and so on. But the Gemara says, oh, but for a lefty, his left hand is everybody else's right hand. Okay, meaning his weak hand is his right hand. That, by the way, I'm a lefty, so I put my tefillin on my right hand. Okay, but the powerful framing is, it doesn't just say that's his weak hand. The halacha is you put it on your weak hand. It actually says his left hand is what everybody else would call their right hand. Okay, that left means your weak hand, you know, so it's like, the category means something different for this person. And I think that is a, you know, really important question to be asking within the disabilities. Can halacha actually define its categories different based on people that have different realities? And that there would be a tremendous power in that. Okay, there's been a hand up for a while. Yes.
Yeah, I love that framing. What the one you've brought in is something that in the disability world is also a principle. So, for example, for autistic people, we would say, oh, that you know, even that we're not different. We're sorry, we're not disabled, but we are actually a different community,
Right.
and yet because we are a minority, all the framing is from a neurotypical perspective. So
Right.
really, I just wanted to sort of say that what I think that what you're reflecting is a type of thinking that is already present within the world of disability, which I love. But is there not also a principle, like maybe an overriding halachic principle for the dignity of that individual person? Surely that's a principle as well for the person in the wheelchair. I mean, is that not a halachic principle?
Sure, it absolutely is. And, and that might be why I would say that the issue of dignity, kavod habriot, can play two types of roles within halacha. One role is it can push me to find an answer. So I might say, normally I would sort of say the simple halacha is you can't do birchat kohanim, you're in a wheelchair. But I understand how important kavod habriot is. So that's pushing me to say, you can rely on this opinion, even though it's a minority opinion, to say that b'diavad it's okay. That's one way it can operate. Another way it can operate is to say that it itself creates a direct override. Sometimes we have ideas like that certain principles, like kavod habriot, human dignity. Another one would be shalom bayit, domestic peace, can override rabbinic restrictions. So a way to say that would be, look, there's absolutely no way that it counts as birchas kohanim. I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, what's the big deal? So you get up, you do birchas kohanim, you make a bracha. All right, technically speaking, it's a bracha levatala. You made a bracha for no purpose. That's a rabbinic violation. But that concern of a rabbinic violation, we can override because of the sake of kavod habriot, human dignity. So yes, that can function in that way, and absolutely it's a value. But what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, either of those two answers still say you're not really doing it, or you're not really doing it the ideal way, but we have other values that are going to tell us that we're going to find a way to make it okay. And what I'm trying to do is to find a way to say, can we just say, you are really doing it? We're going to define this differently for you because, but yes, human dignity is always a present, push to be finding a path here. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I saw that Lance had his hand up, but then it looked like he got pulled away. So we will come back to him when he returns.
Then,
yes, go ahead.
yes, there was. Please read the chat.
Okay, let me read the chat. Is there a halacha forbidding racism and bigotry? Well, there's not specifically around racism, but yes, I mean, there's definitely a halacha that, halacha forbids all forms of, baseless, I would say hatred or what's what I'm looking for? Not disadvantaging, but biasing against people. The fundamental principle that everybody is created in the image of God, and so many mitzvahs in the Torah are about, treating everybody fairly and equitably and properly. So biasing against somebody, for no purpose is, but there's nothing specifically that is labeled as like racism, bigotry. There's nothing in halacha that would say, if I basically feel like I don't like the way you look and therefore I'm not going to be nice to you, or you're black and therefore I'm not going to be nice to you. Halacha would look at those in the same way, that you have violated your basic ethical responsibility of seeing everybody in the image of God and treating everybody equally. But there's not a specific category of racism within halacha. Okay, let us, Lance just returned. Lance, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, a number of points. One is that I am physically challenged in the sense I don't sit in a wheelchair. I do use a rollator when I walk, but one of my problems is I can't stand for more than, say, 5 or 6 minutes without getting numbness in my feet, and I'm forced to sit down. Otherwise, I'll fall. And, at my age, you don't want to fall, let me tell you. And for 25 years in my synagogue, I led services Shabbos and weekdays. And I wanted to continue leading services, but because I can't stand through the leading services, my rabbi will not let me lead services. Okay, now that's one thing.
Wow, that is really, that's a real, because the need to stand during leading services is like, I mean, there's explicit like cases in which, you know, that is nowhere near the same demand as it is by the Birchas Kohanim, you know. So that's, and I can send you particular shuvot and articles written about that, you know, and you know, so anyway, that's very unfortunate that that's the case. So. Yeah.
But isn't the case, Rav Linzer, that the rabbi, the Mareh d'Atra of the locality, determines how these things should be seen? In other words, if the Mareh d'Atra, if my rabbi, who is the Mareh d'Atra,
right,
ruled that I could stand, then I can stand, right?
Right.
Now, I'll tell you, once upon a time, I was Zooming in order to say Kaddish my Yortzah, I was zooming to a conservative synagogue, and they had a scroll in the synagogue from which they read. They gave me the Kohen Aliyah, and I repeated the blessings over Zoom. Now, a week later, when my wife had Yortzah, same synagogue, conservative synagogue, where women are completely equal in every way, shape, and form, I was no longer permitted to count for a minyan, let alone get an aliyah. Now that's a rabbi made a decision, a conservative rabbi made a decision, right?
Right.
And it's mystifying. I mean, it's one thing, I get it, that in Orthodox Judaism, mixed seating is not permitted, although I understand that there is at least one Orthodox synagogue in New England that is egalitarian. But I get it. Okay, I understand that. For someone who is physically challenged, this is a serious problem. And forget about me. Think about all the people, all the Orthodox Jews, for example, who are bedridden or house, right? And they cannot attend services. With Zoom, can. But no Orthodox synagogue that I know Zooms services. Do you know?
On Shabbos.
On Shabbos, right.
Right. Look, I think that, this gets back really to the first class, which is, you know, because Orthodox tends to have a more small c conservative approach to halacha, then sometimes it lacks the proper responsiveness, and it winds up that people get left out. And rabbis have to really be able to identify the sense of religious mandate to find a way. You know, I will tell you that I do know that there is one synagogue that even after COVID, you know, during COVID, they got a special dispensation, as it were, whatever, a special psak, you know, to allow a Zoom being set up on the Yomim Norayim in a way that was very hidden and subtle, and nobody in the show could see it, but people could zoom in. And then afterwards, the reality was, okay, that was so amazing. And now, of course, you know, now we're realizing there are all these people that are being left out every single Shabbos, and now they were finally able to participate. And there actually are still doing it, you know, you know, again, and in a way that anybody in show doesn't feel that there's any Zoom going on, but it does make it possible. You know, but it's, there are some times that, you know, you might feel I'm trying, you know, as best as I can, but I just can't find a way. And there are sometimes you will hit a wall, but I do think, and sometimes a conservative show might have a certain psak that they're trying to accommodate people that I will feel is out of bounds, like, you know, when they decided people could drive to shul on Shabbos because to accommodate people that lived at a distance before an age of Zoom, right? I felt that there was not a halachic justification for that. I feel there's no halachic justification. I feel you could hire a non-Jew and have a, you know, and have a shuttle service to go around and pick people up, right? But I don't feel that you can actually drive. So there will be some times when you feel I tried, you know, as really all, you know, with all full effort as best I can, and I still can't find a solution, and that will happen. But I do feel that it is a big problem that, you know, people aren't trying hard enough. So I'm not saying, I agree with every psak that a conservative shul does for the sake of inclusion, but I do say that Orthodox, communities can be doing so much more than they are, so much more than they are. And yeah, it's unfortunate, that was the ruling that you got from your rabbi, particularly around standing for shliach tzibur. There's a lot of Orthodox poskim that will say explicitly that that is fine. If so,
Really?
yeah. And I'm happy to send you various kuvot on that. And maybe you can even send it to your rabbi.
Do you have my email address?
Bert can forward that to me and I can
Okay,
send
great.
that to you.
Great.
Okay.
Let me ask you one quick question.
Yeah.
Why am I no longer getting your dreshot on Friday?
The Shabbos partnership things, because a few years ago, the demands of being the president became so weighty that I did not have the time or ability or focus to write new ones. Well, there was a while when we were recycling old ones, and maybe we should just be doing that at least. But
you had a group of contributors who no longer send any. There's no chavevi on Friday, as far as I can remember.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Like we were doing a rotation, and then I have to find out sort of like why that stopped. I appreciate your asking. I'm going to there was some reason, but we do have to revisit that. So yeah, thank you.
Okay,
I don't
sorry,
know.
I didn't wanna-
No. You are right about that. I appreciate asking that. Okay, so let's get to look at some sources. Maybe I will start with, in this regard, this idea of like, can you just embrace a different reality? This isn't exactly the case, but there's something very beautiful about this passage. There's a question about somebody who was concerned, somebody who had OCD, who asked me about, they're afraid that they don't say the Shema properly, and then they wind up repeating it and repeating it again and again and again, and and how to handle that situation. So I'm not going to go into my whole answer, but at one point, but I want to just share with you one text that I brought, and this is here up on our website, and this is from the Aruch HaShulchan, okay? And here's what he says, and this is about the need to articulate and say the words of the davening clearly, that which is, if you read the Halakhah, you have to articulate well. And here's what he writes. I'll read it first in the Hebrew and then in the English. I'm starting here in the middle. Upashuthu. Is that okay? Should I make that a little bigger? I think it's pretty big. Make it a little bigger. Okay. Upashuthu demishu nil'ad lashon. It's obvious that somebody who speaks unclearly, let's say somebody has a stutter or a lisp, can't articulate well. Like there are people that can't say a resh properly. That might mean you can't do it like gutturally. Or they can't say a shin. Every time they try to say a shin, they say a sin, like an S sound. So people that are always just, they have a problem enunciating. He said, Yetza, nevertheless, you're Yotze. It counts. Because you are articulating, you are as you speak. That is how you say those words. Okay? So it doesn't matter that that's not how somebody else would say those words. That is how you say those words. So right there you have a certain embracing of that person's reality. It's not like you're Yotze because it's still possible to figure out from context what you mean, right? It's actually shifting perspective. You're Yotze because that is how you speak, okay? The Yoter mizeh ita b'midrash chazit. And there's something is even a more powerful statement is said about this in the Midrash. A pasuk v'diglo alai ahava. So diglo alai ahava means you will, have it as a banner, like a degel, your love for me. Okay, that's a pasuk from Shir HaShirim. So Amar Rabbi Acha, Ama aretz shekorei la'ahava eva. Let's say you have somebody who is not literate, and they read the word ve'ahavta, you shall love, as ve'ayavta, which is an oyev, is an enemy. You shall hate. You shall be an enemy with Hashem your God. Ve'ayavta et Hashem Elokecha. Okay? Instead of ve'ahavta. Kigon ve'ahavta ve'ayavta. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, so God says about that person, V'liglago alai ava. Instead of diglo alai ava, hold the banner, Liglug is like your I translated it as verbal fumblings, that is for me a sign of love. So, I love that. Rather than I'm upset about that, and here you called it a yafta, and it's supposed to be a hafta. I read that is a hafta, and I am like, I love the way that you are trying, that you are expressing it in your own way. So, so I just thought that was very beautiful in both the fact that it just says, let's look at it from his perspective, but there's something very beautiful about, like, it's almost like when you read this, it's sort of like you see God with like a smile on his face, it's like, oh, that's just so, beautiful that he's praying to me, in his way and for him, and that's, there's nothing bidi eved about it. So I think that's just a nice sort of sweet statement along those lines. I want to take a look now at a little bit more, some sources on this. Hold on one second. Okay, so, and maybe particularly, I'm trying to be careful, look at the time, particularly look at one tshuva from Rav Asher Weiss. But let me just start, we'll look at this source sheet together here. Okay, so here I sort of spell out ways in which halacha might be able to, for different types of halachic acts, rethink things in different ways. So one is like, body parts. Will halacha say that if somebody has a prosthetic limb, and they take a lulav with their prosthetic arm, are they holding on to a lulav? Do they recognize that this thing is now considered part of your body, right? Maybe in a way that somebody who did not have a prosthetic arm and used some type of a, extension to hold the lulav would not count. But for this person, because it becomes incorporated into their body, does this now count as their arm? That's like just an initial way. That's something that halacha has dealt with in the past. Another is like, or, even putting tefillin on a prosthetic arm would be taking it one step even further. Okay, the other thing is, and so some of these overlap, is how do you define what a halachic act is? So for example, if there's a halachic act of holding a lulav, what does it mean to hold a lulav if you have a prosthetic arm? But let's take a different question. What does it mean to read or to speak? Okay, can you read a Megillah by reading it through Braille? Now, part of the problem there is it even a kosher Megillah? That's a different issue. A Megillah has to be written with ink, but can we define different things as reading? How about what constitutes speaking? Let's say a deaf person can you have a deaf person be the Baal Koreh? Let's imagine that you've got a community that all understand sign language. Can they look at the Torah? So then they're doing what normally counts as reading. And then rather than trying to enunciate it verbally, sign what they're reading, or the Megillah, right? Can they do that? And will people fulfill their obligation through that? Is that considered speaking? Is seeing sign language considered hearing? All right. So these are all questions about, can we define some of those realities of what constitutes those types of acts differently for people for whom the normal way of doing an act of reading is not through sight, it's through Braille. The normal way of doing an act of speaking is not through verbally, it's through sign language. All right, that becomes the question of, can we actually accept that the definition of these things will look different for these people? Okay. Okay, and then I have some other things whatever. So those are some of the types of questions that we ask. Okay. And I want to take a look here at some examples of this, okay? And let's start here with the tshuva. I'm not doing all of this. I'm being careful about the time, of Rav Moshe Feinstein about what does it mean to hear something through a hearing aid. So do I need to make this even bigger? I'm trying to make it pretty big. Okay, so if you think about a hearing aid or a microphone, you're obviously not hearing the sound waves themselves. You're hearing sound waves have been converted to electrical impulses, which then get transmitted over the wires, which then come back out again through some type of however the science works, through some type of a diaphragm and recreating the sound. It's recreated sound, okay? But, so logically, I did not actually hear what you said. Will I be Yotzei if I hear Kriyas Megillah through a hearing aid? If I hear Tkiyas Shofar through a hearing aid? My father-in-law wears a hearing aid, but when it comes time for Tkiyas Shofar, or Kriyas Megillah, he takes it out and he tries to sit like right up next to the person so he can be hearing it directly. But so do you have to do that? Or can we say that actually in your experience, that is what hearing means? So that is the question. So let's see what Rav Moshe says about this, okay? It's a debate amongst the poskim. Let's see what he says. He says, Hinei lididi misaf ketuva. I have a major, considerable doubt. Even if we say that the scientists are correct, that when you're listening at something through a hearing aid or a microphone, you're not really directly hearing the person's voice. But you're hearing a new voice that was created, based on his voice. Nevertheless, so you would say, okay, so then you're not Yotzei. But nevertheless, nevertheless, it's not like it's a recorded voice. It's not like we're going to record it and play it back. It's live. Okay, is it live or is it Memorex? Anybody who remembers that is at least as old as I am. Okay, who remembers that sound? Is it live or it's Memorex? Any young people on this have no idea what I just said. Anyway, because it is, thank you, Lance. Because, remember when we used to actually have cassette tapes? Oh my God. Anyway, because it is live, you are only hearing the voice as the person is speaking. And that means that you're experiencing it as the person's voice. If you record it and playing it back, you're experiencing it as a recording. But if you're listening to something over a loudspeaker and you're only hearing it as the person is speaking, you're experiencing it as the person's voice. And since that's true, who cares about science? Since at the experiential level, you're experiencing it at that voice, right? Then halachically, we should call that person's voice. Like right now, I'm looking at all of you. I'm really not looking at any of you. What I'm really doing is I'm looking at a digital reproduction of you, that has been made on my screen. But that's not how I experience it. I experience that we're looking at one another and we're listening to one another. So maybe that's how halacha should define it. Because, anything that you're hearing is directly made by your voice. And who really knows anyway how hearing works? Now he doesn't, he says anyway, you create sound waves. The sound waves travel through the air, get into my ear, hit into my eardrum, make a sound or whatever. What is the holiness of the sound waves that you have produced? Why should halacha define speech by the immediate sound waves that you have sent through the air? If you're talking and I'm hearing, maybe that's enough for what halacha defines as speech. And who cares if they go as sound waves through the air or get converted to electrical impulses and get reproduced? Okay, so וכן מסתבר לפי מה שאומרים חכמי הטבע שהכל יש לו הילוך על האוזן וגם יש קצת שיהוי זמן בהילוכו. It's like when you speak, the sound waves have to travel through the air. It takes some time. ומכל מקום נחשב שהוא קול אדם. It's considered your voice. It's possible that the sound made by a microphone, when you are speaking, that you hear it, okay? And therefore, so that's what he says. Now, what I think is interesting about this is he speaks about, it's not exactly what we're looking for. It's not like you have a different reality. For you, speaking is signing, for you, reading is braille. We're still dealing with the same reality of the experiential auditory reality. But what he is saying is, we can sort of embrace it from the perspective of experience, that the experiential, and we don't have to always be looking at it through, let's say, a scientific definition. So even though scientifically it's not your voice, it is experienced as your voice. So, but still it is within the auditory range. Nevertheless, I think, it's showing this approach of how do we think about how these things are fundamentally defined. And for example, I could imagine a posek that would say, look, for somebody who can hear, who naturally goes around without a hearing aid, you need to hear directly, and you're not yotze if you listen over a microphone, okay? But for people who regularly use hearing aids, for them, that is what hearing is defined as, is hearing with the hearing aid in. So, this is, again, like seeing an attempt to try to think about how do we categorize and define, these types of acts, okay? Here's another article, similarly, the case of Birchas Kohanim. This is an article that was written by a contemporary who basically wants to say about, again, that maybe for Kohan, maybe for somebody in a wheelchair, it would be defined differently. So it's not exactly what I said, but let's read what he says, okay? He says, this is the question about Birchas Kohanim in a wheelchair. It says, Nikuda nosefes sheyesh latet aleha hadat. Another thing that's worth asking, Hashela ketzad lagdir yeshivat nechei al kisei galgalim. How to halachically define when somebody who is in a wheelchair, disabled, is in a wheelchair? How should we define it? Should we define it as sitting? Maybe we should define it as something else. Shekain yitachen she'ein lagdir to kiyoshev. Maybe just because that's what sitting looks like for somebody who is able to stand. But for somebody who can only get around in a wheelchair, maybe that's not defined as sitting. Right? So this is beautiful. How do we think about the halachic definition? Should we only define things from the perspective of able-bodied people? Okay? So, and then he says, let's, sort of try to assess this based on why standing is important for Birchas Kohanim. So rather than just sort of saying a broad thing, for this person, what I would have said is, let's ask, how does this person show that they are standing as a way of respect? Let's just go into this person's subjective reality and say, for you, do you position yourself any differently when you sort of are relaxed, and so on, as when everybody else is standing? What would you do to demonstrate that? That's maybe the question I would ask. And maybe that would be relevant for all areas of halacha that require standing. That's how standing would be defined, for this person. He is taking a more limited approach, the author of this piece, and saying, let's understand why it's important to stand for Birchas Kohanim. And then we can determine whether that applies in this case or not. So he's taking a more local approach. And here's what he says. The first approach, I'm obviously jumping to the middle of the article. The first approach that we laid out, it's that, the way a Kohen, there was a halacha that the floor of the Beit HaMikdash was sanctified. And what allowed the Kohanim to do their avoda, they went barefoot in the Beit HaMikdash. And conceptually, one way of understanding that requirement is that they have to be directly, physically touching the floor, in order to be seen as like an extension of the Beit HaMikdash. It's part of their sort of kedusha type of a role. Okay, it gives them kedusha and allows them to play their role. נראה שמבחינה זו אין הבדל בין סתם ישיבה של אדם מסוגל לעמוד לבין אדם יושב דרך קבע כיסא גלגלים. If that's the point, it doesn't matter whether you are able to stand or able or not able to stand. The reality is, your feet need to be on the ground. Now, if it's really just your feet on the ground, then you could just push your feet on the ground. But what he's saying is, if there's some requirement that it's not just standing as an act of respect, if there's some requirement that's like just physically that posture is critical, it defines Kiddusha, it defines something, then okay, then that's just a physical posture you need to be in, all right? But he says, but the second possibility, that it's not about some type of a physical posture that gives Kiddusha. It's a way of demonstrating honor and respect. You're in God's presence. God's presence is coming through you, through your hands to the people. You stand to show respect. And part of showing honor to the Beis HaMikdash. Now he asks, well, how is standing an expression of honor? Yeshiva hi tnucha sheyesh ba kviyut v'ninuchot. He says, sitting is like, it expresses permanence, comfort, you're relaxed. Ulumata amida mevia arayut. Standing is like, you're like, it's like, you're not relaxed. You're like fully, like, not settled, fully present, fully aware, of a sense of your temporariness. If when you stand up to honor somebody, you're not just there lying on the couch and relaxed and somebody important walks into the room. You have to show like a certain readiness and focus, and like this person is important. I can't be in a relaxed state when this person is here. Relevant to the other person who is more the sort of authority, an established person. You're here like ready to do what that person wants. You're here, you can't be just taking care of yourself and being relaxed. From this perspective, how do you look at people that are always in a wheelchair? Are they relaxed or are they, at attention, right? Isn't that what they say, like when they review the troops? Attention, right? And then it's like, what's the word? Like, as you were, right? Or like, amod dom, amod noach. So like, are you as you were or are you at attention? Michad, on the one hand, okay, they are, in this is where they are when they are like sort of relaxed, they're sitting in a wheelchair, like at a meal. Although not necessarily, sometimes they might go from the wheelchair to, to a chair. The fact that they're on a wheelchair shows that they're always ready to move. Like standing by, people that are able-bodied. So I don't know if I fully would agree with that formulation, because I do appreciate that sometimes it might just be, look, formally a certain posture is required, and it's like if you have to be this high in order to get onto the ride, or if you're too tall, you can't go under the overpass. There's certain realities maybe that there's nothing to be doing about. But if the standing is about expressing honor, right, then we should ask, how do you do that for this person? But again, the way I would have gone would be different than the way the author went. I would have said, how does this person show that they're at attention versus show that they're relaxed? They're sitting up straight rather than leaning back. That's what I would have asked. And I think that gets much more into the person's subjective reality and owning their subjective reality. This is a little close, but not exactly. This is like, well, being in a wheelchair is not an expression of being at ease and being relaxed. So maybe the problem with sitting is you're showing you're at ease. And maybe if somebody's always in a wheelchair, it's not really showing they're at ease. So it's not a problem. I don't like this as much. It makes it more local and it makes it more, okay, it's not a problem. You're not really showing that you're, On the one hand, you're not showing that you're at attention, but you're also not showing that you're relaxed. But at least what I like is here's somebody who's trying to say, maybe we have to understand this person's reality and look at it through a different lens. Lance, you have a question.
I have a comment.
Yes.
That is, my understanding of the priestly blessing is that it is chanted in every Shemoneh Esrei, right?
Right.
And it seems to me that is another little point, and that is after each verse we say "Keni Hiratzon." Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. My father taught me to say "Keni Hiratzon Zechus Avraham, Keni
Right.
Hiratzon Zechus Yitzchak,
Right.
Keni Hiratzon Zechus Yaakov,"
Right.
which means to me that the priestly blessing does not come from the Kohanim. The priestly blessing comes from the patriarchs. That's number one. Number two is that as a Kohen, most Kohanim I know, we all sit when the Shliach Tzibur repeats the priestly blessing.
Right.
And I must tell you, this is very funny. On Shabbat during Shachrit, when the who is not a Kohen, the Shliach Tzibur repeated the priestly blessing, I stood and I raised my right hand only, and I gave the sign of the Kohanim, right? Now, I could do that because it was a short period of time. However, during the Torah reading, two men who were getting in Aliyah came to me and thanked me for blessing them. Now, I didn't, when I was in the Israel Museum in 2019, and I was on a tour, and we came to the priestly blessing, and the tour guide said, it was in Hebrew. So can anyone here read the Hebrew? I raised my hand and I read it.
Right.
About 10 minutes later, a woman comes up to me and says, "Thank you for blessing me."
Right. Right.
So, and I'll give you another point too. Well, Rav Avi.
And then can we wrap it up? Because we only have 6 minutes left and I want to get to
Rav Avi interprets the priestly blessing as having 6 verses and not 3.
All right. You'll have to explain that to me later, but I want to thank you for that. But I want to use the last 5 minutes to see one last piece. And this is by Rav Usher Weiss, who is a major contemporary posek. And he's dealing with the issue about the halachic status of a deaf person. Now, you might be aware that, the deaf person, a cheresh, somebody who can't hear and somebody who can't speak intelligibly, is, you need to have both. A, not being able to hear, and B, you cannot speak in a way that is, intelligible, which is often the case by people that have been deaf from birth. And if somebody has both of those qualities, Halakhah in the past defined them as not being a bardas, not being somebody of intellect, able to be a full legal person, within Halakhah. And that was because it was believed that they really did not have intelligence, because we didn't know how to educate deaf people until a few hundred years ago. So for the most part, the assumption was that they really, can't absorb information and therefore they don't really have the same developed intelligence. Now, that we've learned how to educate deaf people, we can say, oh, look at that. They're just as intelligent as everybody else. And that led Poskin to ask this question about can we redefine the category? So this has been going on for a few hundred years. Can we say that a cheresh is a bardat, somebody of intellect, and definitely contemporary poskim, say that he is. So Rav Usher Weiss has a tshuva discussing it. And the first half of the tshuva, which is interesting on its own, he basically sort of says, look, in the past when we assumed that all deaf people did not have intellect, and maybe the reality was that we weren't able to educate them. So the general rule was that they were seen of, and maybe part of a reality of lack of education, not having the same intelligence. Even if there were a few exceptions to that category, and we could see that there were people that did have intelligence, nevertheless, a status is based on a category, and you can't change it for a few individuals, and they just get defined by the whole category. Nowadays that we see that the entire category, everybody is deaf, is able to be educated and has intelligence, so the whole category changes. So that's one approach he has. But then he says something which might be considered like that's nice. That gets to the core issue of whether they're intelligent or not. But then he said something that might be seen as more technical, but I also think that it's more relevant to, more broadly speaking, around the disabilities and around what I've been talking about. Because remember, he says the halachic definition of deaf is can't hear and can't speak, can't communicate. And the Gemara even says that even if somebody can write, it doesn't count. It has to be speech. So you would think, okay, well, then what can you do? Okay, but look at what he says here. He says like this. He says, V'od, I'm in this paragraph, I still remain. Okay, V'od chochechani binyan zeh. Whoops, hold on. I still remain unsettled about this. The Efshar, the Cheresh Hamit Kasher in Bnei Adam, Ba'ofen Shotef, that it's possible that a deaf person who can communicate with other people in a flowing manner, in an like just fluent and flowing, Shotef v'tadir, uninterrupted, flowing manner. You're constantly, how does normal conversation go? You interrupt people, it's constant, it's back and forth, and you can do that with sign language, okay? Bisvat simanim, if you can do that with sign language, chashiv kecheresh hamedaber, ve'eino shomea. So fine, he can't hear, but we should now define him as somebody who can speak. Why does speech have to be defined as verbal? Why can't speech be defined as communicating? The otu, b'neder v'shvua askinan, are we talking about like an oath, that there's a halacha that it has to be verbalized? That requires specifically, fine, there are some areas of halacha that are very specific that require verbal speech, like uttering an oath, okay? But here, umalan imidaber bashmat kol, but outside of those things like taking an oath, why do I care if somebody speaks through making, audible sounds? Oh, b'tnuat tzvasayim, or if they speak through b'tnuas yadayim, or if they speak through moving their hands and lips without audible sounds. Kol shemit kasher ba'ofen shotef, anybody that communicates in a flowing, uninterrupted manner, meaning he's contrasting it to the Gemara's case of writing. When you write, first you interact with the paper, then somebody has to read what you wrote. It is not this direct communication. But sign language is direct communication. Umishtamesh b'safa, and is using a language. It's a language. It's known as sign language. They're not just playing charades and gesturing, right? They're using a language. V'adif miktiva, and it's better than writing. Delo mahani. Delo olamein aktiva mishameshet kem say kishos ratzif v'shotef bein bnei adam. Writing is not a means of of communicating that is constant and back and forth and immediate, okay? Blah, 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 blah. As long as you can speak with a language, who cares if the language is sign language or English or Hebrew or Arabic? You are communicating in a language, and that should count as speech. So what I love about this is that it basically says, since when should speech be defined as verbalizing? Now, maybe there are one or two narrow areas in halacha where that is true. But why should we assume it's always true? And, this summer we had a kollel of people doing halachic topics, and one person did the topic of how does a deaf person supposed to daven Shmona Esrei? And Shmona Esrei is, the simple halacha is that you have to move your lips, and it has to be audible. Like, it shouldn't be your neighbor should hear you, but you have to actually get some sound out of your mouth. And the question is, maybe that's the requirement for somebody who can speak. For somebody who can speak, if you're not verbalizing it, it remains in the realm of thought. It remains not in the realm yet of, when thought gets expressed outward, it has a different power. But for somebody who can't speak, why should sign language not constitute saying the words of Shemona Esrei? So again, what we have seen here is, what I think is like really the next frontier of disabilities halacha. Not just to take the issues, that were being said before about, human dignity and so on, and say, we're going to find a way, okay, b'diavad, you don't have to stand because we can rely on this position, or, kavod habriot overrides, but everything still is defined in terms of able-bodied, non-disabilities population. Can we get to a place where we say, what is this person's reality? What does listening mean for this person? What does speaking mean for this person? What does standing mean for this person? And maybe that could actually not only get things out of the b'diavad realm, but really create a shift where we don't see the world through a ableist perspective, and we're able to embrace, the wide range of human reality and experience. All right, so with that, we will end. And I'm a little exhausted, but
thank you very much.
Yes.
That's first of all. Secondly, can you send me the source sheets that you were using, and I'll send it on to everybody. And in particular for Lance, can you send me the stuff that you had said that you might have with regard to being about tefillah sitting?
Yeah. And if you wouldn't,
I'll forward it to him.
Send me that email to remind me. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, I'll send you an email. I need to talk to you in any event. In any event, thank you very much.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a wonderful remainder of your summer.
Starting next week.
Wait a second, Rav Linzer, don't go yet. I know that you're exhausted, but thank you so much for this. It's so. Who was the pasuk that the last amazing way of looking at it, because it really is modern day. That's how deaf people communicate.
Right. That's Rav Usher Weiss.
Amazing. And is it accepted? Is it accepted?
I mean, it's not. It hasn't. It's accepted in the sense that already many poskim already accept that a deaf person is considered to be intelligent for areas of halacha. He didn't really innovate a new halachic position, as it were, but he gave a new reason, and there's a real power to that reason that can then be brought forward, to the next level.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, take care, everybody. It's been a lot, very meaningful. Be well.
Thank you.